My name is Manny Castro. I worked at Newark Street Jail in Newark from 1969 until it was closed.
Okay, and do you remember your first day on the job?
Oh yeah.
Well, what was this,
We practically had a riot. It was a Saturday, September the 20th, 1969. And like I said, we almost had a riot then because one of the prisoners was taking his time showering and shaving. And when the officers wanted to lock him in, the other inmates were starting to protest.
and was there any training in between?
Back then, no. There was no training at all. They gave you a set of keys, they told you where you were working, and you had to find your way. I figured that was the way things were back then.
What was the condition of the place while you were there?
No, it was clean. I mean, you know, at the end of except for midnights, it was always mopped.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so it was always kept clean. It was always, as a matter of fact, the paint used to be thick on the walls from being painted so many times throughout the course of the years.
The people who worked there liked the job?
Yeah, although I recall one guy, his last name was Scott. He was hired, he came in, worked in the old North Wing. At 11 o'clock in the morning, he asked the lieutenant if he'd go out to his car. He went out to his car and left. And that was it, the one day.
Well, one day wonder?
Yeah, and it wasn't even 8 hours, it was only 3.
Wow. Was the pay enough to support a family on?
You know, back then, in '69, the starting salary was $6,900, which wasn't bad back then.
Right.
And like I said, I had the record for overtime.
What were the shifts?
Well, you had 8 to 4, 4 to 12, and midnights.
Take me through your typical day, from the moment you got there to the time you would go home.
Oof. Well, when you got there in the morning, you had to get the guys ready for court. Then when you got those guys out, then at 9 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the morning, you let the inmates out to walk on the tier. Then they locked in at 11, and you fed them from 11 till whenever they got done. Then they came out again for a walk from 1 o'clock till 3. Then at 3 o'clock you secured the wing, you know, did all your paperwork and all, and then you were ready to go home. But in the interim also, you might be getting new prisoners in, and you had to book them in. You had to take a medical on them. You got to do all the paperwork and assign them a cell and so on and so forth. Well, midnights was preferable because most of those guys, there was very little activity on the midnight shift. The 4 to 12 shift, the inmates themselves used to lock in at 8 o'clock at night. The trustees used to lock in at 9. From 9 o'clock at night till midnight, you weren't even allowed to whisper to the guy in the next cell.
Really?
Yeah, and they adhered to that.
They did.
After 9 o'clock, that place was dead quiet. Basically, for instance, in the North Wing, there were 3 guards. Sometimes if there was excess officers, we had 4. But normally there were 3 guards in the North Wing, and there were like 62 prisoners. Yeah, well, across the street was the jail annex. That was basically where, like, your laundry workers used to be derelicts that they used to pick up off the streets, and they would, because they had basically minor charges. They were only there for maybe 6 months, so they used to use them in the laundries and all. And in the West Wing on the flats, they had what they call Rammy cells. They were for guys that were going through DTs, and they used to see elephants, you name it. They used to see them all. But they were after they cleaned out, so to speak. Then they became laundry workers, and they moved them across the street to the jail annex.
Who was the typical inmate, if there is such a thing?
Well, no, you had, there were, at one point there were juveniles, because the youth house couldn't handle them, so they sent them to the jail, and they had they were on the bottom tiers, which were called the flats, because you can keep a better eye on them, so there wouldn't be any problems. But then you had a lot of narcotics, you had quite a few homicides, and you know, robberies and stuff like that.
Right.
And
So-
there was tags on the wall with the inmate's name and cell number, and the color of the tag represented basically his charge. Juveniles were light blue, narcotics were yellow, a regular armed robbery or anything of that respect was white, and homicides were red.
What sorts of things did you see prisoners sneak in over the years, or make while they
Well,
while they were there?
In your shoe, there's a steel shank, and a lot of them used to take that steel shank out and make weapons out of it. You know, file it down on the stone and make a weapon out of it. There was one incident. It wasn't related to that jail, but I remember one time they took the handle of a paint can and ground the tip down to a real fine point, and they stabbed the guy in the heart. And the guy he thought he just got punched, but it penetrated his heart. So he thought, you know, he got punched and he got the wind knocked out of him. When they took him to the hospital, he eventually died.
Right.
And then they found out that it was a puncture
Oh
wound.
boy.
But in jail, you see the prisoner every day, you know, and some of them could be there 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, you're not going to keep them their arms left. I mean, you become, you know, friendly to a certain point.
Did inmates often try to get favors from the guards?
Oh yeah, they
Well,
always try that.
What did they want? Cigarettes?
Basically, yeah. Or back then, the Afro comb was popular. You know, if you could get them an Afro comb and all. And I told them, you know, if you can support me for the rest of my life, I'll gladly bring one in for you. Because I'm not about to get fired because you want an Afro comb.
Right, which they could use as a weapon.
Right.
Yeah.
Because they knock the teeth off and then they have like a shank. In that jail, cigarettes were like money. And if you borrowed a cigarette, then you had to pay back two. And a lot of times the guys didn't have the cigarettes to pay back. And there was all kind of altercations. No, it's like I said, a lot of times it's like home reunion week.
Right.
They know a lot of their friends and all are in there, and it's like they're going away to a country club.
Yeah.
That was a jail. These new places to me are country clubs.